Welcome, everybody, and thank you all for joining us tonight for our second virtual speaker series of 2026. We're delighted to have Devjoy Dev with us tonight, and he is going to speak to us about sleep, which is in space, which is very exciting. So, Dev recently graduated with his PhD in biomedical engineering from NYU. And his background includes everything from sleep biology, medical device design, gastroenterology, and space health. He's got a lot that he does besides his research. He is an advocate for the UK US science policy collaboration and research and communication, and driven by topics such as gender inequality in healthcare. He also loves rowing and reading and hackathons, and he has a really impressive record with the hackathons and winning them. And he also is a former stage magician, which I think is really interesting. So when you see him in person, maybe we can ask a few more deeper questions about that. But we are thrilled to have you tonight, Dev, and thank you so much for sharing your work with us. And with that, I'll let you take it from there and share about your wonderful work.
Thank you, Lizzie. I hope no one this weekend at ECAD or TechMed asked me to do any magic performances. Um, but in general, thank you so much for to the New England chapter at the Explorers Club for inviting me. It's honestly a real pleasure to speak with you all. And if even if we don't have time to ask that many questions or to chat afterwards, we'd love to meet you all at the weekend as well at TechMed for sure. So let's get started. Just
And
gonna
I'm just going to add, if you do have questions while Dev is presenting, and you think you might forget them, you can throw them in the chat and we'll save them for later. But otherwise, we'll try and save our questions till the end.
Cool. So, just to get started, I feel like sort of like how Lizzie was describing me, and with a lot of people around the world, people aren't really tailored to just one geographical location anymore. Everyone's background is so diverse and people are coming from everywhere. So, I thought it'd be best to showcase a nice atlas to showcase sort of my background, who the hell am I, and where have I come from, and what am I going to be presenting about. So, it all started here in London. I'm from a town in Manchester. And this is where my journey began with biomedical engineering. Everything from manipulating the human body and biology using engineering principles. I just love that sort of ability and that question. And then it grew from there, trying to get exposed to the different medical environments in Asia and Africa. How do we tailor different solutions to different patients? And then I actually came here to Boston about almost 9 to 10 years ago. And I want to get away from the UK and expose myself to research there. And fast forward through grad school, through different internships and work placements, I did my PhD at New York University, and now I'm here working as a senior clinical specialist at Medtronic. But what I'm going to be talking about is my stint for the last 4 to 5 years at NYU, where I was working in the field of space medicine, which I've been doing for the last roughly 10 years, working in that field of research. And it all started with one question. How much sleep did you get last night? So this is a very common question that a lot of people, a lot of us will ask ourselves and to each other. Currently, we're crazily the only species on the planet that purposely deprive ourselves of sleep. Can you believe that? We purposely deprive ourselves of sleep because we go along this notion that, burning the midnight oil is going to get you to that extra second of success. And that's such, there's no other statement that is more false than that. We need our sleep, and everyone on the planet experiences the importance of sleep. And you and I both know that, when we get that nice amount of 7 to 9 hours of sleep, we wake up so refreshed, so alert, cognitively, performance-wise. And even if we shift that just by an hour, whether we're sleeping a little earlier or sleeping a little later, that change in that pattern, we could feel the consequences straight away. It's something that none of us can avoid. It really is the silent killer because quite like a leaky pipe in a house, how a leaky pipe will affect every nook and cranny of a house, sleep is going to affect every nook and cranny of your human body, essentially. It's going to affect all the physiological systems, your cardiovascular system, your metabolic system, your digestion, your musculoskeletal, etc., etc. It affects everything, and we just don't see it on the short term. That's why we neglect it. We go to sleep and we wake up, and that's that. We don't actually see the consequences straight away. And currently, sleep is the number one predictor of all-cause mortality. So, quite literally, the shorter you sleep, the shorter your life. And to put it clearly through statistics, almost like a third of the world are sort of sleep depriving themselves, or at least not getting good quality sleep. And like I said, it affects a huge number of different neurological and metabolic disorders. So, we should be aiming to get roughly 7 to 9 hours of sleep, but otherwise because of our work, because of our lifestyle, because of societal pressures, we aren't able to get that. So think about how we know how important it is and how risky that is to put our sleep at detriment. Now, put that in the context of the most extreme environment we've ever known, and that's in space. So now you've got this clash of these two critical um, ecosystems of the most extreme environment and then one of the most important and vital systems that we know, which is sleep and our circadian rhythm. Space, we're not evolved to live up there. There is a multitude of harsh health effects that get affected, and these are caused by a number of different hazards. Now, NASA has outlined these hazards quite well, five of them. So the first one is deep space cosmic radiation. The second is isolation and confinement, or what we know as ice conditions. And then there's this hostile bacterial environment, the distance from the Earth, and then the last one is gravity or the lack thereof. And so all of these different hazards affect our healthcare up in space in different ways. And what my research during my PhD really looked at was the microgravity aspect. How does that gravity aspect affect the sleep mechanisms that we experience? And so this is kind of how sleep is currently done on the ISS, on the International Space Station. You can see that they're sort of hooked into these jackets on the wall and hanging around like zombies in a very uncomfortable way, and it's really loud. This is currently the uh, the current status of how astronauts sleep, even as we speak right now. And a number of reasons why they get poor sleep. First of all, there's no visual cues. Sunlight is the number one regulator for sleep. We need that to regulate our 24-hour clock. We've been doing that for millennia since we've been evolved as a human species. And it's known as what we call in chronobiology as a Zeitgeber. Zeitgebers are things that regulate our sleep. So other Zeitgebers are things like food and the type of food we intake, the timing of the food, temperature, which is why, when we sleep and we tend to prefer cooler temperatures. Other things that affect the sleep in space, like we said, is the microgravity itself and the fluctuating stress levels. And then lastly, that spatial confinement and high noise level. And my research will be looking at that microgravity aspect. So currently, there's been a lot of research that has attempted to look into sleep, and for many decades, the field of space medicine has been progressing forward, but a lot of them has been largely behavior-based and behavior-focused. Either they're missing a key aspect of the full sleep medicine picture or circadian architecture, or they only look at a certain culture set, or they're not getting a full big sample size. Just like everything in space, the biggest problem is sample size. You just can't get enough samples up there. You can't get enough astronauts up there because it's so expensive. And sleep is the biology of sleep is very well established here on Earth. So we know how we're sleeping down here, but in space, it's harder to do that because you can't take blood samples, you can't take these biological samples there. We're trying to figure that out though, as we're progressing. And this particular paper here is fantastic. This is the closest we've got to understanding how the mechanisms change in these microgravity environments. But again, it only looks at a particular type of cell type and only looks at one type of biomarker. So we wanted to build on that. And so based on that theory, there's a well-known chronobiologist, a sleep biologist, and he said that if every cell in our body oscillated in the same way, our bodies would act like one giant clock and inflexible and unable to adapt to a changing environment. Having variability in cell population makes it more flexible and increases the resilience of an organism. So that keyword resilience is something that every person who works in space health or space medicine would very much know. It's something that we're all trying to strive towards. Trying how do we make the human body more resilient in an extreme environment? And so, based on that sort of notion, the way that sleep currently works is that the circadian rhythm comes from the brain, and there's this place right here in the front of your forehead called the hypothalamus, the lateral hypothalamus. And there's a region in there called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or for short, SEN. Now, the SEN is your master clock. This is the principal clock. This is what actually governs your 24-hour clock, or almost 24 hours. But it's not the only clock in your system. People think that, okay, the brain is where the master clock is and that's it. But in fact, almost virtually every cell and tissue in your body has a clock as well. Some more independent than others. So your master clock is telling all the other clocks what time it is ticking. You know, at what time is it daytime, what time is it nighttime. But there are some, like in your liver and in your skin tissues, that actually have its own clock and are quite independent and resilient. So the theory here, the hypothesis, is that your SEN, your master clock, is really relying on sunlight. The sunlight rises and sets. It is the main regulator for our sleep and our sleep-wake cycle. But now when you remove that, you know, in your space, there is no sunlight up there, you know, that is going around. On the ISS, it is rotating 16 times. So astronauts on the ISS are getting 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets. I don't think that circadian rhythm is going to be that resilient. But they spend enough time on the ISS and they're pretty close by to the Earth to be able to adapt. But once you go beyond that, it's a bigger question. So now, without that sunlight, how is the circadian rhythm going to operate? And we want to compare this peripheral clock, these smaller clocks, to this master clock. We're going to be more reliant on these smaller clocks to be able to keep us entrained. So we have this fantastic way to simulate microgravity in the lab called the random positioning machine. And this with this system, we can simulate uh, lunar gravity or different types of partial gravity, even Mars. But here we're just looking at microgravity, really, really low amounts of gravity, and it's a good way to simulate that on a biological scale. So what we did in the lab is that we took in vivo studies and in vitro studies to look and compare against, that master clock I was talking about, compared to the subsidiary or peripheral clocks, and compare them, take gene analysis, take protein analysis to get a really good aspect and view on how does the sleep mechanism operate in microgravity. And we utilized three different biomarkers, HER1, HER2, and BMAL1. So there are many different clock genes. These are known as clock genes, but we use these as clear biomarkers because first of all, HER1 and BMAL1, they're opposite. They are very antagonistic in terms of their relationship. So in the daytime, HER1 will be very high and BMAL1 will be really low. And then at the nighttime, BMAL1 will amplify and HER1 will be low. And HER2 should also follow similar amplitudes to HER1. So these are nice biomarkers to see that we know here for sleep biology on Earth, but we don't know too much about when we put that in an extreme environment like space. So this was the kind of studies we were doing. And I don't want to bombard too much data, and a lot of these are unpublished, but I'll get the main gist of what this data is saying. So across the different clock genes, we're already seeing after 3 days, 24 hours, 48 hours, and 72 hours, we're already seeing drastic, significant changes to those clock genes. And we didn't expect that. Initially, we were expecting to be roughly the same. We didn't expect changes already after 24 hours. And it begs a question, okay, if that's happening after 24 hours, what's happening even in the shorter term? How long will these changes be experienced? Do we recover? Do we adapt? Are they going to continue or do they wither off? So all these questions, we're asking more questions as we're getting more data. This is another visual on the same data I just showed, but just for 24 hours. And you can see with the green, the changes we're already seeing to the circadian gene expression, which is very interesting to see. And it's very dependent on the type of clock gene, and it's very dependent on the time on the time point that's being collected as well. So here, we're just showcasing the same data, but for 24 hours, the peripheral cells, we're taking these mouse embryonic fibroblasts and comparing them to these neurological cells. So again, this is what we were talking about, where we put all these sleep cells in microgravity, and we're comparing these peripheral oscillators to the master clock. On one side, we're questioning, okay, how are they changing in microgravity? And the second question is, they should be pretty similar, and we're hoping they're pretty similar. If they are not, then it showcases that the master clock is still the power tool. And it is. Look, you could see that the relationship is very similar to each other, but we're seeing more robust circadian rhythms in the master clock, which is what we expect. And further studies are going to take this on to see how does the master clock and the peripheral clock change over time. So this is after 24 hours, 1 day time points over a couple of days. How does it look over a couple of hours? We're seeing over 24 hours, maybe after a couple of hours, maybe we're seeing changes as well. And so now we're doing the same study. We're looking at the gene expression over a couple of hours, and we're not seeing too many statistical. We're seeing some changes, but we're not seeing any statistical significance. So that's interesting to see that we're actually seeing major changes after a day or 2 days or 3 days, but we're not seeing any major changes after just a couple of hours. One thing I'd like to note here, which is quite ironic, is with any sleep scientist or anytime you're doing a sleep study, I had to wake up in the middle of the night to do these studies. Because we have a 24-hour clock, you need to collect samples also in the very late hours of the day. And I found that so ironic. To do a sleep study, you have to sleep deprive yourself. I just want to put that out there. FYI, if anyone's interested in doing these, just make sure you know beforehand. So, the takeaways from that is, first of all, that microgravity clearly had an effect on these internal clock mechanisms on the short term. And we don't know if that's going to change as they're exposed to more microgravity. The peripheral clocks that we saw are very clock gene dependent. It depends on the type of clock gene we're looking at and at what time point. We saw that for PER1, for example, they were very quick to respond. They were the quickest, in fact, after just 1 day. While BMAL1, it took at least 3 days to respond, so it was the slowest, but we saw even more significant changes in that clock gene than we did with PER1. With the major and the principal clock, we're seeing a very strong resemblance in terms of rhythmic expression to the peripheral oscillators, but we need to see that over a longer period of time. How does that change? Is it going to continue being similar? But overall, the main gist of the study is showcase and reinforced existing data that there is an existence of integrated signaling network between the mechanosensitive pathways and circadian gene regulation. So what that means is essentially it's pretty amazing because essentially our neural networks, our tissues and cells, which are really important for sleep, they have a circadian gene regulation. And microgravity is essentially a mechanical force. We're right now, because there's this gravity, this mechanical force that is dragging us to the ground. Now, if you remove that, it seems like from all of these studies that if you remove that mechanical force, that is having an effect on the gene expression of our sleep, which is really profound. And that's what we're proving here, that if you remove that mechanosensitive pathway, it actually has an effect on that type of regulation. And we need to be able to understand that better and see how we can prepare it. So, this thesis looked at the sleep part. It looked at the sleep part in extreme environments, but there is a third part that my whole PhD research looked at as well, which I'm not going to go into too much detail because of time, but because it is exciting and related, I'm just going to touch on it very briefly, and that is with the gut. So the brain and the gut are intrinsically connected through this gut-brain axis, and it is so fascinating. There's this wonderful bidirectional relationship between the gut and the brain, and we know this, when you're feeling queasy for a presentation like I'm feeling now, or when you're feeling constipated because you're very stressed, or you have this gut feeling. You know, it's intrinsically connected through this enteric nervous system, and you've got something called the vagus nerve, which is your main roadway. And just like your brain that has trillions and trillions of neurons, which can be activated by electrical activity, your gut can also be activated because it's got trillions of neurons as well that line it. You've got these sexy organs like the brain, like the heart and the lungs. Everyone knows this in high school. But the gut is more than just digestion. It is so intelligent. It is your second brain. And so we wanted to see that, okay, we know something is happening to our sleep in microgravity. How do we play around with this mechanism? What is the connection between the gut and sleep? And maybe the gut can be a solution there. So we look at neuromodulation of the gut, trying to modulate and activate it and see how they're intrinsically connected. So we did a lot of different EEG studies, mice studies, to try and see how they were connected. And again, lots of data, even more than this. But the main point we're trying to showcase is that we studied a lot of different areas of the gut. Where in the gut is it connected? How much stimulation, how much current do we need to make that connection solid before we see any result in the EEG waves? And we saw that the small intestine is really the biggest influence in terms of electrical stimulation from the gut to the brain in terms of these major space regions in the brain. So what we created at the end were our lab loves to create different ingestible devices because we want to avoid surgical interventions. You know, anything with surgery is an invasive procedure, and using the gut through forms of pills is a very nice and safe way. And so actually for this, you know, we want to avoid any sort of metals and stimulation or pharmaceutical drugs that have side effects or don't actually have a long-term therapeutic effects. We were exploring a completely novel way of stimulating or drug delivery, and that is through a what we call the gut gel electrode, which is due to be published. And this is a basically a hydrogel cuff that is conductive, and it was very exciting for us to basically come up with this and conceptualize this. So just like many other of the devices that we have taken out through our lab at NYU, between NYU and NYU Abu Dhabi, it was very exciting to come up with this sort of hydrogel device to be able to stimulate and modulate the gut and affect neurological conditions in a way that we haven't done before. And for me, it was focused on sleep. And likewise, you know, we published this paper as well, where this was a 3D printed pill that can collect biomicrobiome data as well in a very hard and inaccessible way, because it is difficult to access that upper GI data. So anyway, this is just to showcase the sort of devices that we've conceptualized and produced in the lab and how they can be used to affect different neurological conditions and potentially be used in space conditions as well, because we really think that gut-brain axis is a key. If you want to understand and find a solution for the sleep problem, you have to bring in the gut. And likewise, if you want to come up with a solution for the gut, you have to bring in sleep. So the two are connected for sure. So that's the thesis and the 5 years of research within my view of space medicine. But what other areas of space medicine are there across the field? And I bring you back to this atlas. And back when I was at Imperial College London, I actually worked again on electrical stimulation, but all to do with the cardiovascular system. We worked with the European Space Agency to come up with a device. What they were trying to come up with is a modular system for emergencies, and I'm not sure if they're continuing with it anymore. This is in Germany, and essentially they wanted me to come up with a way to redesign medical devices like atrial fibrillation ablation devices and see how they can be redesigned for extreme environments. So that was something I was working on in the past. But let's have a look at this global atlas in a different way that maybe many of us have seen recently. And this is a shot from the Artemis mission that many of us might recognize. It was such an incredible mission. I could speak so many hours about this. It was such an inspiring mission, and it involves actually a lot of very exciting projects regarding space health that I'm really looking forward to seeing the results for. So some of those projects are listed here. So the Avatar mission is really interesting. This is basically a virtual astronaut tissue analog response. So essentially, what's happening here is it's basically a organ on a chip. So here, not just the four astronauts are going all the way to the moon and back, but they're taking these organ chips along with them to see how the extreme environment of radiation of the microgravity are going to affect it. And why did they choose organ on chips? Because they're almost like biotissue analogs. They're pretty much the size of a USB stick. And so it's going to be really interesting to see when they come back, or they've already come back, to see how these chips have responded. And you could choose any tissue. There are many different ways you can incorporate different physiological systems and tissues into these chips. But here they've used bone marrow because bone marrow, I think, is going to respond first to any type of radiation or these extreme environments. So it's going to be quite interesting to see that. And then the second project, what I'm sort of biased in terms of interest is the Archer project. So that's Artemis Research for Crew Health and Readiness. This is essentially utilizing a wearable device to continuously monitor pre-mission, during mission, and post-mission about their sleep patterns. So that's why I'm very excited about that. But also their motion and how they move independently, but also as a team. And so, that aspect of how they cooperate as a team in these long duration missions is going to be very important. So again, this is going to be really exciting data to collect. And I think as we progress forward in these missions, not just at NASA, but other agencies and corporations, the space health aspect is going to be really key. I love to mention this that, and this is not to devalue any other area of space, but you have a multitude of different fields. You've got geology, satellite navigation. You've got you know telecommunications and rocketry propulsion, etc., etc. But space medicine is the only one that brings us into the picture, and that's what it's all about. Trying to the pursuit of knowledge and pushing those boundaries to better understand how we're going to fit into this model. If we're going to go to the next frontier as human beings, as a species, that this is what needs to be done. So also the commercial sector is getting involved in really making things much more accessible and affordable. So there's this company called Saga in Denmark, and they have created the circadian rhythm device where it incorporates light therapy. So this was actually on the ISS a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure if it's still there. It might still be there. But essentially, they wanted to play around with shades of red to induce sleepiness and shades of blue to initiate signs of wakefulness. And so that was very exciting to see that, okay, we're not just utilizing, sleeping pills to help astronauts sleep, because currently that's the number one solution. For a lot of astronauts associated with the NASA, but also other agencies, sleeping pills, sleep hypnotics like melatonin and zolpidem, this is the number one solution right now, unfortunately, to help astronauts sleep. Yeah, they do get good rest on these short-term missions, but if they want to sleep on time and wake up on time, they take these sleeping pills. But sometimes you will still wake up sleep deprived. And that's the problem. These pills, they don't give naturalistic sleep. So we need to be able to better understand the mechanism being at play here, that being affected, and how do we sort of functionalize them in a better way than just using pharmaceutical drugs. Another um, commercial sector company that is also taking part in the sleep area is a company called Vast, and they're basically set to come and create the first US commercial space station, which is going to be really exciting. And they've created this patent pending pressurizing mattress, if you will, which is interesting, to sort of induce a pressure and comfort. I think it'll be quite exciting to see. And this will be in their space station Haven 1. So again, this is going to be for the short term for either space passengers, or space tourists, or for astronauts doing research. But it doesn't answer the long-term question. As we go further beyond the Earth's magnetosphere and we spend longer in those regions beyond the Earth's protected magnetosphere, how does our circadian rhythm adapt or change or get affected. And so it's really key that, and this is across the board, not just for sleep, but everything we find and the data we collect from space, it's very important to translate that here to Earth. And that's the key thing. I think slowly the non-space community, the general population, are understanding the benefits of how space can help us on Earth, essentially. There's such a translational benefit. And if we could improve sleep in that environment, we can for sure improve ours. Sleep is a biological necessity that we cannot afford to underestimate. And it's really key. And it affects, especially if we're putting astronauts into very far distant missions like the moon or Mars. They're going to be isolated, they're going to be stressed in these tin cans. We need to be able to consider that. So the storytelling aspect, the mental health aspect is going to be critical. And so I'm now just going to finalize by introducing these two projects I'm working on right now, two very different publications. The first is IGI Global. This is a project that I've been working on for almost the last year, and it's involving, with my editing team, almost over 50 authors from around the world who are experts in space medicine, and it's going to be really exciting to publish this. It's not just a publication paper, it's an academic book. So it's going to be a really important resource for researchers, physicians, clinicians around the world to learn more about how space medicine is changing over the next decade, but also how is it changing different technologies that we have right now, and how will technology change the field as a whole. So that's one project I'm very excited to work on right now. The other is this publication of Humans of the Sky. So this is actually a project I've been working on for the last 10 years, and it started very simply with a journal. And right now I have three of them, or four of them actually. So what this involves is it involved collecting stories from passengers, from cabin crew, from pilots from across the world every time I fly. And since 2017, 2016, that's when I started this project. So every single flight I've taken, I've used these journals to collect handwritten extracts and interviews from members of the aviation industry to understand how are they dealing with the flight? How are they dealing with the sleep? Jetting from here and there across the world, they're very personal stories for where they're coming from, where they're going to. They could write as much as they want, or they could write as little as they want. And it's such a humbling moment to be able to collect these personal stories that you can write anonymously if you want to. But I think it's such a key aspect that I think many of the explorers tuning into this webinar will understand that storytelling is such an integral part of any expedition. And I think if we are indeed going to take, astronauts and explorers to the other side of the galaxy, of our solar system, we need to be able to get the storytelling part right as well. I think the written word is such a profound, powerful tool that embodies what humanity is all about. We are in such a world that is driven by digitizing everything, and that's why I wanted to go back to the power of writing. You are trapped, almost like a trapped or audience, a captive audience on the plane, and people have this very down-to-earth moment where they can share their stories. And I've been doing this for the last 10 years, and I have now over 300 stories, and I'm hoping to publish it next year. I've done this for the aviation industry. I wonder if I could do this for the aerospace industry as well. I think it would be quite interesting. So I'm just going to finalize now and finish up with this last photo. This is an incredible shot, again, taken from the Artemis crew recently as they splashed down 4 days, just a few days ago. And right now, the world can often feel so polarized and divided and lost. But this mission is an example or a reminder of how space exploration can really bring people together when we put our minds together. And just like Carl Sagan said so many times throughout his life, almost as if you will, a distraction from the world's petty disagreements and fights between each other, we need to focus on what we can accomplish together. And so in the words of astronaut Christina Koch, she said, "We choose Earth, we choose each other." So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dev. That was amazing. And I know I learned a lot. I'm sure others did as well. And you explained it so wonderfully. So thank you so much for sharing all of your work. I'm excited to see the publications coming out soon.
For sure.
So we've got time for questions now. If anyone has any questions, you can, yeah, I would say perfect. You can unshare if you want. You're welcome to unmute if you would like. We're all muted, but you're welcome to unmute. And if anyone has any questions, we can take a couple questions or comments.
Um, I'll lead with the question. It might be a little clunky, um, but I'm just wondering, and maybe I missed it in the presentation. Whether you've done any longer longitudinal studies, if you will,
Yeah.
like
Sure.
that last like, a week, a month, or
Yeah.
three
Yeah.
months, and whether or not there's any data you've collected that have further insights into how sleep deprivation or altitude affects human body's metabolism.
Yeah, no, great question. And it's a good point that I didn't highlight too well. Essentially, we're using these RPM systems, right, where we could simulate microgravity, but they can only last for a few days. So when we're using these tissue samples and we're simulating microgravity for these sleeping cells, essentially we can only do it for about 3 to 5 days because by then the cells start to die and that induced circadian rhythm also starts to wear off. So there's that limit in terms of how long we could simulate it. But for astronauts, like I said, a lot of the sleep studies right now haven't been mechanism focused or behavior focused. They've been very uh, sort of survey based. And there are systems like actigraphy and polysomnography and EEG that they have been able to measure how does the sleep architecture get affected by space flight and by the ISS, the rotation, the isolation confinement. But they're all, very subsidiary. And so it doesn't really answer the mechanism. So in terms of mechanism, 3 to 5 days is the best as we got. But yeah, you're right. The long-term aspect is so key. That's the question we're all asking ourselves. Okay, we know the answer for short term. How does it change in the long term? We're trying to figure that out.
Thank you. And just as a follow-on, I think about all the movies I saw
Yeah.
growing up, people in space and, who go into, cryogenic chambers
Right. Right.
and I'm just wondering if your research and thinking about all those movies portraying, longer term space travel, whether or not that's actually a reality or just a figment of the imagination that you could put somebody in a state that would simulate sleep for an
Yeah.
extended period of time. Is that
Yeah.
what's your view on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're still far away from that. But some of my colleagues on this call actually are working specifically on that sort of hibernation aspect. And if in a way, hibernation is almost like a long-term aspect of sleep. And we're just biologically attuned to having a very short-term sleep. We need 70, I said that, the shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. But also if you have too much sleep, that's bad as well. We need 7 to 9 hours. And there's this beauty point. That's just how we're evolved. There are other animals that are completely evolved differently. Like you have in the Galapagos, you have these specific type of penguins that can basically go on without sleeping at all, and they nap for 4 seconds at a time because they have to protect their offspring. So they have to, it's almost like a mechanism, a protective mechanism. And they can nap just for 4 seconds, all the time. And then they've accumulated 11 hours of good quality sleep. And I'm just thinking, wow, that's incredible. But again, that's a completely different organism because of their metabolism, because of how they've evolved in that environment. And we evolved in this environment. Now, trying to do cryo sleep and trying to do really long-term sleep that we're not evolved to, that's going to evolve, that's going to involve some genetic engineering or some kind of attunement to our mechanism to change that. If we can, we saw in our studies that, neuromodulation can affect those sleep circuitries in some way. Nothing that causes permanent sleep changes, but it does cause some changes. So maybe we have to go down that line to be able to investigate that. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Thank you.
I wanted to add that to that, Mark. Stay tuned because as soon as the book is published in the upcoming months, you will have some more answers. But just to give you a preview, what the hypothesis is that many species hibernate. Cryogenic is it's advancing, but the problem is that we're having difficulty removing the heat slow enough and the water crystals form and they break the cells. But the process of vitrification, which is what the frogs and other animals that use cryogenics to hibernate, is something that's is advancing. And right now, there's a colleague that is able to vitrify bigger organs. Let's see where it goes. In rocket science, a lot of it is about cryogenics because they need to cool down those reactive materials fast enough. So maybe it will come from there too. So the both fields will help out. But on the smaller perspective, maybe we will not be able to. We're not there to do cryogenics yet. But maybe hibernation is an answer. And at this point, we're not able to induce hibernation like the bear or the squirrel. But the topic that is emerging to advance this important field of research is quasi-torpor, which is shallow levels of decreasing the metabolism. And that has been quite promising. So stay tuned. There will be more information about that in the textbook.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ekaterina. She's a colleague of mine who's the expert on hibernation. So we're both working on that publication together. Devin, I think you have a question.
Yes. Hi, guys. I don't know if you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to start my video here. Hello. So, wow, Dev, totally blew my mind. I want to hear hours and hours more from you. It was fascinating. Thank you so, so much.
Welcome.
I'm wondering, I am a storyteller, so I loved your bit about storytelling and how
Yeah.
important that is. So as a storyteller, I'm wondering what got you into this field in the first place? What was it that ignited your curiosity?
Yeah, good question. So it was when I first came to Boston those years ago, and I've always loved biomedical engineering, but in the back of my mind, I was always fascinated with space, as everyone is. And
Yes.
then I was doing a research stint at Harvard Medical School, and they said, "Oh, you could take one class." But I'm only in Harvard once in a lifetime, so I
Right.
took advantage and I just took 5 classes instead.
Good
Um,
for you.
yeah. And at the time, they allowed me to, there's this cross collaboration between MIT and Harvard. And there was this class at MIT called bioastronautics. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds incredible. I didn't even know you could mix medicine and space together.
So cool.
Yeah, and so that's how it kickstarted. And there was a professor, the Apollo professor at MIT, called Larry Young. He's passed away now, but I think I was perhaps his last student, and he was such a pioneer in sensory systems. So, we don't think about it often, but our vestibular system in our ear, which basically, prevents us from having nausea and controls how we perceive our three-dimensional environment, that is such a big aspect when we go into space because that is completely uplifted and our whole understanding of our sensory system just changes. So he was a
Right.
big pioneer in that area and he kickstarted that inspiration for me. And I was like, wow, okay, if this is a field, I would love to deep dive into this more.
That is
The MIT
amazing.
has a huge number of astronaut alumni. Even just earlier this last week, there was a conference at MIT, and there were 7 astronauts at the conference. So it was incredible and humbling
Wow.
to be amongst them, because you see them as superhuman.
Yeah.
as these celebrities, and then you realize they're just also human beings. So it was a very humbling experience to be amongst them and to keep pushing me forward.
That is so awesome. Congratulations on all of that. And also, I have another question, if you don't mind.
Please, please, yeah.
Are does research into tardigrades help
Mm.
at all? Is that involved? Do you involve tardigrades at all in your research and how they go to sleep for, and then they can be exposed to all kinds of, stuff that would kill most life forms, most organisms?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not studying them myself, but it is very much a consideration in the space health field. So tardigrades are very popular because they're so resilient against high levels of radiation.
It's
And
amazing.
we're trying to, I think there have been successful studies where they've taken some of the genes from these tardigrades and put them in mice to see how resilient they can be against different types of radiation. And we haven't taken it to the clinical level as yet, but I think that's the hope. We're trying to, in some ways, there are theories that maybe the only way for us to be a spacefaring species is to genetically engineer ourselves. Because currently we're just
Wow.
very soft, subtle, very innocent species that are just not evolved to be in these very, very extreme environments. You know, it's
Right.
an austere place to be, and we need all this protection. But perhaps we need to genetically engineer ourselves to be more resilient as well.
Wow. That is yet another lecture we want to hear
Yeah.
from. Okay, I'll stop hogging all the room. Thank you so much, Dev, and also to the
Yeah.
chapter. You guys are great. You do such interesting stuff. Thank you for inviting me on this one.
Definitely. You're welcome to all of them. Dev, there's one in the chat that I don't know if the person who put it in would like to unmute and say it out loud or if you want to um, read it.
Yeah, hi Lizzie. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hi Dev. Thank you for the great presentation. It was really exciting to learn about all the cool things you did. I was just wondering if astronauts have a time zone of their own, or like, if you could throw a bit of light into that, because, sometimes it's important to keep track of time out in space as well, right? I
Yeah.
know they're
Yeah.
not on planet Earth, so I'm just curious to know if they have a time zone of sorts, or what do they use to like, measure when they should sleep, when they should eat. If you
Yeah.
could throw some
Yeah.
light. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun question. So for sure, to ensure they have good sleep, they have to keep time. And honestly, they have their own schedule. For the moon, that's another question though, because I think just recently in 2024, 2026, the US government and along with NASA, and they recruited the other international agencies to ensure that there is a lunar standard time. And I think it's not too different to the Earth, but there are slight changes. So essentially, they're trying to establish a lunar standard time so that it's standardized for the rest of the world. But in terms of time zones, yeah, the ISS is, like I said, is rotating like 16 times around the planet. So they have their own time. Yeah. But I think also depending on the capsule, so you have like the American, the European, previously you had the Chinese, Russian, they would have to be attuned to mission control as well to their own countries. So I think they would sometimes have their own time zones, if I'm not correct.
Thank you.
Sean? Yeah.
Hi, Deb. Thank you. I am fighting bedtime routine. So you may have already said this and I missed it, but I did see some really exciting stuff about, diurnal cycles. Do you like from what you've seen, do you
Mm.
think it will be easier in the future to pharmaceutically manipulate these molecular pathways to help restore a circadian rhythm, or do you think it's just easier to try to artificially generate gravity to get as much around that issue as you can?
Sort of both. I do think there are benefits to pharmaceutical interventions. There was a great paper I read, it was close to the pandemic, and they basically published something about sleep deprivation that led to almost death in animals, in mice and rodents. And essentially, a big signature of that is reactive oxygen species, ROS. and they looked all over the body for it, and they didn't see it anywhere in the brain, but they saw huge amounts of it in the gut, and which was really unexpected for them. And so they started utilizing these pharmaceutical pills or these antioxidants to sort of relieve the reactive oxygen species in the gut, and it drastically improved the sleep, or at least recovered the sleep. So I do see trying if it involves tackling this gut brain axis pathway, I definitely see potential in that. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And do you think there's anything from this that you would apply to normal gravity sleep? Anything there that you would say like, this seems like like something that emphasize that maybe it's exaggerated in space, but it
Yeah.
also applies to us here.
Yeah, just the basic things. I mean, routine. I think after studying this, I realized that sleep quality and the amount of sleep is great and very key for good quality, but routine is king. There was a clinical study that showcased that both are important, but which one is more important? And it kept showing that with the candidates that had a routine and regularity with their sleep, they had stronger benefits. So if anything, for us down here, even on the weekends, unfortunately, keep the same time to going to sleep to waking up.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dev, I have a question about the slightly different, but the gut reminded me of it. The device that you 3D printed
Yeah,
and that goes into the small intestine. How long does it stay in there? And like how
yeah.
much data can you get from it?
So this is the pill that we collect, like the microbiome sampler thing. Yeah, um so this was trialed in mice, and their retention timing is a little bit different to humans, but essentially it would last as long as the whole digestive tract time. So it was 3D printed, but it's not biodegradable, essentially. So you would just essentially poop it out. But when you poop it out, that's where you have the sample, and that is so hard to access. So it wouldn't, stay in the body for too long. I think maybe within 48 hours it'd be out. Yeah.
Cool. And then my other question is, in terms of astronauts going into space, you said that there's the chips that you can get that, and you're so excited for the Artemis data, which
Yeah.
I don't blame you. I would be totally jazzed for that also. But would there be a benefit to sending someone who does space medicine actually up as an astronaut to collect data or do anything kind of in real time, or is it better to just get the chip from them and have it back down here?
Yeah, great question. I mean, sign me up if they do allow that. I think we're seeing a lot more diversity in the panel of astronauts that are going up compared to 50 years ago when the industry started. You're seeing a lot of 40, 50-year-old military white men who are going, and they have a particular strong suit, but a lack of diversity there. And now we're getting people from all kinds of backgrounds, not just people from the military background, but we're getting scientists, we're getting physicians, we're getting um, people from telecommunications and geologists, teachers. So I think that diversity is going to be very cool to see. And I think ESA, the European Space Agency, has a Portuguese astronaut who is a biomedical engineer who did some space medicine research. And even Kate Rubins from NASA, she's a biomedical scientist as well. So people they're seeing the benefits of those who have a PhD or who have science background because they can easily conduct their research up there. There's a funny statement from Kate Rubins because people forget that on the ISS they're doing a study like every day. It's just experiment after experiment. And Kate Rubins used to be a supervisor down here on Earth even before she went up there, so she knows these how to operate simple things like a pipette and things like that so easily like it's the back of her hand. So having that background goes a long way. And I think it would definitely benefit missions in the future if people have a strong scientific background. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there any other questions out there for Dev? All right, and that's my teacher wait time. You always count to
Okay.
10. That last lingering question.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dev. This was wonderful. Really, really wonderful. And you can see in the chat there's a lot of enthusiasm and thanks for you. And I feel like even from the questions, we all have learned a lot tonight. So
Okay.
anyone who's headed down to the annual dinner weekend, look for Dev. He'll be around and ask any further questions that you have. And then also, just for our chapter, we'll be meeting before both the new members welcome on Friday night and then the members welcome for a chapter photo. So be sure to look out front for us 15 minutes before each of those begin. I'm blanking on the times. I think it's 4:45 and 5:45. But I'll send out a reminder email ahead of time. And we have a few other exciting chapter events coming up that I don't have the exact date yet, but they will be in Woods Hole, another virtual talk, and then a event in Woods Hole. Um, and then we have our World Oceans event coming up on June 6th as well. So stay tuned for all of those. And really thank you, Dev, for a really wonderful and engaging presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.